Hello, everyone, and welcome to Imagining Early American Jews, hosted by the Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center at American Ancestors. My name is Rachel King. I'm the executive director of the Jewish Heritage Center, and I will be your moderator this evening. For those of you who are new to us, the Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center is dedicated to collecting, preserving, and illuminating Jewish history and heritage. Our archives contain millions of items documenting Jewish individuals, families, businesses, and institutions throughout New England. And these collections are used by researchers from all over the world. We also offer public programming and educational resources for wide audiences. We are pleased to be pleased to be part of American Ancestors in Boston, a national nonprofit center for family history, heritage, and culture. Before we get started with this evening's program, I just want to make a couple of quick housekeeping notes. You in the audience will be muted throughout this program, but we do welcome your questions. You can type them into the Q&A by clicking on Q&A at the bottom of your screen anytime during the presentation. And we will try to answer as many questions as we can following the presentation. And in case there are any glitches, technological glitches on your end or on ours, we will be sending you a link to the recording of this program so you can watch it afterwards. So now I am pleased to welcome our speaker this evening and a longtime friend of the Jewish Heritage Center, Michael Hoberman. Dr. Hoberman is a professor of English studies at Fitchburg State University in Massachusetts, and he also teaches at Yeshiva University in New York. He has published several books on Jewish American history, including New Israel, New England, Jews and Puritans in Early America, as well as 100 Acres of America, the geography of Jewish American literary history. He has published articles in Tablet Magazine, the Jewish Review of Books, and other popular and scholarly sources. This spring, he is a fellow at the University of Pennsylvania's Katz Center for Advanced Judaic Studies. Dr. Hoberman is currently working on a new book project, which tells the story of Theodore Satius Solomons, the founder of California's John Muir Trail. So without further ado, welcome Michael Hoberman.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm trying to, here we go. There we go. Now you can see me. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, American Ancestors and Weiner Center. I'm excited to tell you all about this book and its contents and highlight some of the more interesting things I learned in the course of writing the book. I want to call your attention ahead of time to two things. One, just a way of reminding myself that in the final slide at the end of the talk, you will see, among other things, my email address, and that's there because I encourage you after the talk, if you have questions that you want to follow up about with me, besides, through the chat and through the Q&A tonight, I encourage anyone to email me if you want to have a further conversation about things that I discussed tonight. The other thing is that you'll see, so this is what you see in this first slide is the cover of my book. And you'll notice that the word imagining is highlighted. The title is Imagining Early American Jews. I want to just call attention to that fact so that I can make one point clear, which is that this is a book that isn't really telling anything we don't already know, telling us anything we don't already know archivally about early American Jewish history. That work has been done and continues to be done by all kinds of innovative scholars. This is a book about how we imagine that history and how people, both popular writers and filmmakers and curators of museums, have popularized that early history, sometimes mythologizing it, sometimes simplifying it, and essentially making it more accessible and more interesting to popular audiences. But the idea of imagining is really at the heart of what I'm trying to do. And I will also explain the cover to you, but I'm going to hold off on doing that until the end as well. So just keep in mind the image that you think you see, that is what you see. It is an image of a synagogue captured through the lens of somebody's iPhone. And I want you to keep wondering what that means and where it came from. So let's move on to our subject matter. Here's a slide of, I think this picture was probably taken this fall at one of the No King's Day events. And the reason I'm showing you this slide is to remind you and to remind us all that history lives on in the present, and that the way we think about and represent history is very much a function of our needs and desires and fears and anxieties and hopes in the present. And what I mean by that, just to refer more specifically to this particular picture, political protesters in the current political era have been invoking the legacy of the American Revolution in order to articulate their opposition to the current president. Invoking the American Revolution is just one way that people have of looking at an event that happened 250 years ago through the lens of what we think, what we want, what we need today. And that's very much the spirit of my book, which I'll get to, which is essentially how do American Jews in particular look at their early history in America in order to, as a way of addressing their anxieties, their hopes, their needs in the present. Now, the general project of using history as a basis for understanding and reshaping the past in order to reshape the present. There are so many examples I could invoke of that, but one of the more recent ones, aside from the one I just mentioned, here is the 1619 Project. Many of you will probably remember that in 2019, a group of, I think it was primarily New York Times writers, so you had journalists, photographers, documentarians, fiction writers, historians, all collaborating on retelling the history of America through the lens of what occurred, the signal event of 1619, which was the introduction of African slavery in North America. So that's another way in which early American history was used and, of course, continues to be used in order to address needs in the present. Actually, as I'm speaking to you now tonight in Philadelphia, I'm actually about 2 blocks away from Independence Hall. And in the very, very recent news here in Philadelphia, there was a set of plaques that were put up on the Independence Hall area commemorating the slaves who built the first the house that housed the president of the United States when Philadelphia was the U.S. capital. Those plaques were then removed by the current administration a few weeks ago, and there have been many protests. I think just today the news came out that a local judge has ordered the federal government to return those plaques to their place. All of which is a way to say that early American history means a lot to us in the present. So I've invoked a couple examples, I guess you might say, from the political left. But of course, people on the political right will act similarly and invoke early American history for their needs. So, for instance, in the newspaper headline that you see on the left-hand side, ideas about American, Christian nationalism in the United States, very often the people who promulgate those ideas are dipping back into their interpretation of early American history. They are interpreting what the founding fathers said 250 years ago in service of an ideological claim that they want to make today. The comment on the right-hand side from a fairly notorious right-wing commentator is another example of, in this case, somebody invoking the history of slavery in order to make a larger point that they want to make about current race conditions concerning race in the United States. So this is all to say that American people in general, not just Jews, have long been in the habit of interpreting early history for the needs in the present. Now, we look more specifically in this talk and in this book at Jewish history in America. And I invoke this story because this, I think, is perhaps it's certainly the first documented event of American Jews reflecting on their history. in order to address needs in the present. So I'll try to tell this story briefly. The image that you see on the right is of Columbia College, or it might have been King's College when this image was made. But Columbia, either way, this is the campus of Columbia in Lower Manhattan around the turn of the 19th century. And the manuscript that you see on the left was a speech that was given at the commencement address at the commencement of Columbia in 1800. The speech was given by somebody named Samson Simpson, who is believed to have been the first, maybe the second Jew to graduate from Columbia. He was graduating in 1800, and he was invited, among several other graduates, to deliver a commencement address at the ceremony that was being held that day, actually, interestingly, at St. Paul's Chapel in Lower Manhattan. He was invited to give his commencement address in Hebrew. This is because Columbia championed the study of ancient languages, primarily at Latin and Greek, but Hebrew was also one of them. And being Jewish and having studied at the synagogue, which I'll speak of a little while from now, the synagogue that existed in New York at this time, Simpson was believed to be the most qualified graduate of that class to deliver a commencement address in Hebrew. He didn't write the speech. The speech was written for him by his rabbi. His rabbi was somebody named Gershom Mendes Satius. This was the person who taught Simpson Hebrew at Columbia, or I'm sorry, in Hebrew school. But what's interesting for our purposes is that the content of the speech, it was very short. It probably didn't take more than about 2 or 3 minutes for him to read. The content of the speech was essentially a backward glance at Jewish history in North America, and more specifically, a backward glance at Jewish history in the city of New York, which Simpson told his audience began in the 1650s. This was essentially accurate. So 150 years after the Jews first arrived in New York, they were already commemorating that history. They were already making a case for their claim to be native New Yorkers. And again, to bring it back to a point that I made before, they were serving a need in the present. The need in the present had to do with the extremely polarized political situation that existed in the United States in 1800. There was a lot if we think of ourselves as living in a polarized era, well, these people did as well. And there was an election coming up, and many members of the Jewish community voted Jeffersonian. Others were Federalists. The Jews felt, as they always do in times of political crisis, the Jews feel vulnerable. And so Simpson and his rabbi were making the case that Jews were part of the New York experience and the New York history going back many years. So here's an example of Jews looking at their past and using it to understand their present. All right, so we go to roughly 95 years later. Here's a different situation in which a Jewish historian or a Jewish activist, I should say, takes early Jewish American history and interprets it for a fairly popular audience. The book that you see in front of you was compiled by Simon Wolf. Simon Wolf was a German Jew, fairly assimilated German Jew, who was an advocate for Jewish causes in New York, but more specifically, published this book in the late 1890s as essentially a compendium of all the Jewish men who had served in American wars, going back to the 7 Years' War, the French Indian War, including the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the Civil War, and so on. He put this book together because he wanted his audience to understand and appreciate that Jews had contributed meaningfully to the American experience, and particularly to events like the Revolutionary War. It was no coincidence that he did this in the late 1890s, because this is exactly the period, among other things, first of all, it was within a couple of years of the founding of the American Jewish Historical Society, but more specifically, for political purposes, the need that he was addressing was a need that had to do with the fact that, of course, the 1890s was a high point of Eastern European Jewish immigration to North America, and there was a lot of prejudice and anti-Semitism directed at these new immigrants, and Wolf, for his part, wanted to prove to a popular audience that they had nothing to worry about, that these Jews from Eastern Europe could be American, were willfully and loyally American people. And as proof, he said, well, look at the record of Jews and what they've done to contribute to American culture already. So this is another case in which the history was being used for a need in the present. More recently than that, we look at 1976. Now we're within the realm of my own personal memories. I remember the bicentennial. I'm sure some of you do as well. Among other forms of commemoration that occurred in the bicentennial, this stamp was issued, I think actually came out in 1975, so a year before the bicentennial. Haim Solomon, as many of you will know, was a Polish-born Jewish financier who helped to fund the Continental Congress and the American war effort during the Revolutionary War. And in his own time, of course, he garnered some attention from people around him. But more recently, in other words, many years after he died, his example was invoked, particularly by American Jews who were eager to burnish their reputation as loyal Americans. This was true in 1975. It was true in the 1940s when a statue of him was unveiled in Chicago. Again, a use of a historical figure from Jewish history, a use of this historical figure in order to burnish a claim, in order to essentially shore up the needs that Jews had to feel secure and to feel appreciated and as though they belonged in America. We also have the example in the story of the American Civil War, and in particular, Southern Jews have had a history, right? Perhaps in some cases up to the present day, of commemorating their war veterans. This book is actually, it may look, the cover of the book may make you think back to the 1950s, but in fact, this book was published in 2000. It's actually a pretty readable and historically accurate study of Jewish Confederate service during the Civil War. I chose it mostly for the image which essentially glorifies Jewish service to the South during the Civil War. And for better or worse, this is also a habit that American Jews have had, particularly around calling attention to their service in American war efforts. And that would include, and does include, and has included service to the South during the Civil War. I've spoken about the national situation. I've spoken about the Southern situation, and now we get to the far West, right? There's a whole history of Jews popularizing, American Jews popularizing their history on the American frontier, the Western frontier. This is a photograph of a group of members of the Acoma Pueblo in New Mexico. The man on the far right with the long dark coat, his name Solomon Bebo. He was a German Jew who came to this pueblo in the 1880s and served briefly as a governor of the pueblo, married a native woman. And again, this is an image that one can look to see, to be in order to make the claim, well, Jews were on the frontier, Jews participated in frontier life, Jews interacted with native people, Jews, served in the efforts to, tame the West, all that kind of thing. So essentially, I think part of what I'm trying to lead to and hint at is the development of a Jewish American mythology around early American history. Okay, so now you get to watch your first video. When you get to the 1970s, this pattern of mythologizing early Jewish American history begins, I won't say it begins to fall apart, but it essentially enters a new phase, a phase that's open enough to include, I guess you'd call it parody and humor. Many of you will recognize the clip you're about to see from Blazing Saddles. It's about 2.5 minutes long, and I hope you won't mind indulging in seeing it again. Again, what you're going to see, what you want to look out for is the ways in which the presence of Jews is, essentially magnified, reimagined, fantasized about in the context of a Western movie. And of course, Mel Brooks is the star of this scene. So I'll say no more, and we'll hear the clip.
Now you tell me your story. What's a dazzling urbanite like you doing in a rustic setting like this?
If you really must pry.
Oh, I must.
Well, back in '56, my folks and I were part of this long wagon train moving west. not exactly part of it. You might say we was bringing up the rear, when suddenly, from out of the west, came the entire Sioux Nation. And let me tell you, baby, they was open for business. Naturally, the white folks didn't let us travel in their circle, so we made our own.
Schwarzes. No, seid nicht mehr Sugar. Laws im Gain! Kappa walk, it's all right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be gesinnt. Take off. Hast du gesehen in deinem Leben? They darker than us. Woof!
All right, I think
And the red?
we can stop the video there. Thank you. And what I want to say about that is, okay, you can see the effects of obviously Mel Brooks's sense of humor, but there's also, I think this is a movie that only could have come out after the Civil Rights Movement. People were familiar with that. The way that race is sort of placed at the center of Western history. There's all kinds of ways in which Mel Brooks has sort of blown up the conventions around the mythologizing of the West, and he's inserted Jews into the middle of that story to jazz it up in interesting ways. All right, now, also when you get to the 1970s, and this brings up a sort of another theme I want to develop here, one of the reasons that I wrote my book was to basically remind American Jews, remind us as American Jews, how important our history is and how long that history goes back, how far that history goes back, and why it's important with us, why it's important for us as American Jews to reckon with that history, partly because since the 1970s in particular, American Jews have been, I guess, I don't want to come across as saying it in the wrong way, but we've been distracted by stories that took place, that have taken place overseas. The Holocaust is one of those stories, one of those historical events that has distracted American Jews from thinking and engaging deeply with the implications of their own history in America. The other story, we can go to the next slide, the other story that is, again, distracting. I understand that it's an important story. It's an intrinsically Jewish story, but it's also a distraction from concentrating on the experiences that Americans have had in America, American Jews have had in America. That, of course, that story is the story of Israel, which again, in the 1960s and 70s, really exerted a lot of power over the Jewish American imagination. So my book is an attempt to kind of bring us back to the facts here, which is that Jews have been living in North America since the 1650s, and that it's important for us, for them, to engage with the implications of that history. Now, one of the reasons the history of Jews in America is so interesting and worth talking about is that it offers many possibilities for the imagination. And this particular story, I think, is really a fascinating touchstone to the imagination. Perhaps some of you have heard about this, and I want to tell this story briefly, but essentially, Mordecai Emanuel Noah was a New York-based Jewish politician, sometime diplomat, sometime journalist, political activist, outspoken advocate for Jewish rights, and a playwright as well. And in 1825, he essentially went in on a large real estate purchase of Grand Island in the Niagara River, just outside Buffalo, New York, and then announced to the Jewish population of the world that he was going to host a Jewish refuge on that island. He named it Ararat from the Noah story. And a large parade was held, a big pageant was held. Many people came to witness the laying of the cornerstone, which is what you see on the right-hand side. And this experiment in essentially creating a Zion for the Jews, a refuge for the Jews in upstate New York, lasted all of 24 hours because no Jews showed up for this. It really happened. They really did have the parade, but that was the extent of it. However, many writers and artists have taken this event, which is full of symbolic possibility, and turned it into the occasion for telling stories. None other than Israel Zangwill wrote a story about Ararat. Ben Ketcher, the New York-based graphic novelist, wrote a book called The Jew of New York, which I discuss in my book, which retells the story of Ararat. An Israeli writer, Nava Semel, wrote a book called Israel in the early 2000s that posits, what happened, what would have been like if the Jews had come. Well, among other things, Noah would have married a native woman. There would have been no need for a state of Israel. There wouldn't have been a Holocaust. So early Jewish American history, my point here is early Jewish American history is a touchstone to the imagination. There's a lot of crazy things that happen in it that artists can grab hold of. All right, now we're going to move away from that to some actualities. One of the chapters of my book looks carefully at how early American synagogues, particularly in three cities, three places, New York, Newport, and Philadelphia, have been commemorated. I'm going to talk fairly briefly about the slides that you see here. So Sharith Israel was the first Jewish congregation founded in North America. Its first members were the people that I mentioned before who arrived in New Amsterdam in the 1650s. The plaque on the left is where this is the site that their original synagogue was on. This is the Mill Street Synagogue that was built in 1730. I kind of get a kick out of the fact that right next to where that synagogue was, there's now a lobster shack. So I guess that's just a reminder that we always look at history through the lens of the present. That's one of the themes of my book. But on a more serious note, if you're interested in the early history of Sharith Israel and the first Jews to come to New York, the place to go, the museum that you want to go to, is Sharith Israel itself. Of course, that congregation has moved uptown several times. Since the 1890s, they've been housed on Central Park West and 69th Street. And if you visit Sharith Israel, they will show you their little synagogue, which is essentially a shrine to their early days. All of the furnishings you see in this image date back to not just some of them date back to the 1730 Mill Street Synagogue. Others date back to other older 19th century buildings that they held. So again, here's a situation where a current day Jewish congregation commemorates its past in order to essentially make an assertion about Jews having been present for the pivotal, the signal events of early American history. And one of the more compelling, we'll go to the next slide, one of the more compelling instances of this occurs on Memorial Day, many years. The congregation of Sharith Israel will move its way downtown to the burial ground that the synagogue first established in the 1600s. At Chatham Squares is now essentially in the center of Chinatown. They hold a wreath-laying ceremony during Memorial Day. There are military reenactors that show up, and the two people that are seen in the uniforms that are seen in the photograph on the right-hand side, these are two current day members of the congregation who were war veterans from the American Army. The man on the left, when this picture was taken in 2018, I think was over 100 years old, had served in the Battle of the Bulge, if I'm not mistaken. But one of the more interesting, really fascinating situations that applies to him is that he is lineally descended from members of that synagogue who served in the Civil War and also the Revolutionary War. So there's a lineage there, and Sharith Israel takes that lineage seriously. It's an interesting and somewhat fraught claim from my standpoint, because when people if there's an attempt being made to legitimize Jewish presence in North America on the basis of a lineage claim, on the basis of being able to say, well, Jews have been here all along, in a sense, that contradicts one of the major principles of the American Revolution, which is that it really doesn't matter where your ancestors came from or how long they've been here. Now we'll go to Newport briefly. I want to point out some things about Newport. Many of you are probably familiar with the Touro Synagogue. I'm not going to speak too much about it. I'm going to just tell one story, really, which is a lot of what I am interested in doing in my book is sort of discussing the legends and myths that develop out of this history. And one of the more fascinating legends that is developed around the Touro Synagogue is the following. I only heard about this story. I think I was giving a talk like this, a Zoom talk, maybe 5 years or so ago. And I showed an image of the Touro Synagogue, and an audience member during the Q&A said, is it true they have a sort of a crawl space beneath the table, beneath the reading table in the center of the room there? Is it true what I heard that this was used to hide escaped slaves on the Underground Railroad? Now, I'd never heard this story before. I kind of doubted that it could be historically accurate, but I wasn't going to pass immediate judgment on it. I looked it up and I found indeed that there were two recently published works, travel guides to Rhode Island, that recounted this same exact story. And not only that, but told the story in the following way, what these books said. And these are books published in the 2000s. These books both said the same thing, that the Jews who founded the synagogue in Newport were refugees from the Inquisition. And on that basis, they were very sympathetic to any other oppressed people. And so when it came time for escaped slaves to come to Rhode Island, the Jews were the natural allies of these escaped slaves and hid them in this crawl space. Now, as you may be gathering from my tone here, there isn't an ounce of truth to this story. And the reason we know there's not an ounce of truth to this story is that the Jews of Newport more or less left Newport in 1790. They left Newport because in the aftermath of the American Revolution, there was an economic crisis that made it was just not a viable place to conduct business anymore. So the Jews of Newport moved to places like Boston, New York, Charleston, to the Caribbean. There was no Jewish community in Newport during the time of the Underground Railroad. And so I think the plausible explanation for this legend, well, there are a couple. There's a sort of an ideological, I think we can understand why people told the story. And I think there's actually a way to sort of situate it in actuality. So the reason people tell the story, my assessment is that Jews, American Jews, particularly in the contemporary era, want to be on the right side of history, want to have been on the right side of history, like to think of ourselves as allies to fellow oppressed people, and particularly in a racialized society like ours, want to be able to have a certifiable history of alliance with Black people. So that would be the ideological explanation for why the story would be told. I think the reason the story cropped up in the first place would probably have to do with the fact that it is quite plausible that Underground Railroad escapees did hide in the synagogue, but if they did, they were brought there by the Quakers who had the keys to the synagogue during the 19th century. So, and as we know, Quakers were very active in the Underground Railroad. So I think there's a germ of truth to the story, but Jews had absolutely nothing to do with it except that they were the owners of that particular piece of real estate. I want to go to the next image to mention one other thing about Newport, which is in the image on the right, you see that there's a park outside the synagogue called Patriots Park. You can't read the sign, but the sign says essentially this park is dedicated to the memory of the Jewish heroes who served in the American Revolution. This is an interesting sign to me because it commemorates about half of Newport's Jewish population from the colonial and Revolutionary War periods. The other half of the population were Tories and did not serve the American Revolution as a cause, but the park commemorates the American Revolutionary War heroes without making any mention of the Tories. So again, history, we use history for the purposes that it serves us in the present, and sometimes that involves ignoring the complexities of history, and Newport was a very complicated place during the Revolution. One last synagogue image we'll take a look at. This is Mikveh Israel here in Philadelphia. As it happens, when I conclude this talk, I'm going to a concert there this very evening. The building is new, as you can see, but the synagogue originates in 1740. And the next slide will show you that Mikveh Israel has, I think going back to about the time of the bicentennial, Mikveh Israel has styled itself the Synagogue of the American Revolution. There's a basis of truth here because there were members of the synagogue congregation who were participants in the American Revolution. But of course, during the American Revolution, Mikveh Israel had no thought of itself as being the synagogue of the American Revolution. This is an invention of a modern era when American Jews, particularly around the commemoration of big events in American history, have wanted to essentially solidify their reputation as loyal Americans. Okay, so now we're going to go on to another part of my book, another aspect of my book. The part of the book that I enjoyed researching and writing the most was the final chapter. And in that chapter, I discussed genealogy. What I did in this chapter was I found about a dozen people who are living descendants of early American Jews, and I conducted interviews with them. I asked them to tell me about the legacy of their ancestors, what it meant to them in the present, how they interpreted it, what they heard growing up from their parents and grandparents about their Jewish history, and so on. But early on, I wanted to understand, the practice of genealogy it's a very popular hobby in America. I think I just read recently it is the second most popular hobby behind gardening. So genealogy is an endeavor that Jews get into, but all Americans really participate in. What you see on the left-hand side was an effort made in 1935 on the part of some, I will call them Jewish blue bloods. These were Jews who were descended from families who came to North America between 1654 and 1789, and essentially they created the equivalent of a blue book, which was essentially a social register, enumerating the families that were here during that period of early Jewish American history, and enumerating them in order to claim status for themselves in the present, which was 1935. Jewish genealogy as a hobby really got going in the 1970s with this book that you see on the right, Finding Our Fathers by Dan Rottenberg. Just for footnote's sake, he is also the person, totally unrelated, he is the person who coined the term yuppie back in 1980 or so. All right, next slide. We're going to consider we're going to think about the sort of reputation of the Sephardic elite who are represented in books like that one I showed you on the previous slide, the Jewish Mayflower passengers, right? So these people, the ancestors, the descendants of these people have been somewhat fetishized by history. But then in a more up-to-date way, I want to call people's attention, and I understand some members of the audience tonight are actually members of the DAR, so a shout out to DAR. The DAR, at least as of when I looked up this page on the internet about 3 or 4 years ago, the DAR has a dedicated Jewish page for people who think they have Jewish ancestors who served during the American Revolution. They also have an African American page and so on. So the DAR, your grandparents' DAR is not today's DAR. We'll put it that way. Now, I want to talk about some of the people that I met in my interviews. We'll go to the next slide. Among the various people that I met as I was trying to track down living descendants, I met members of the Seixas Solomons family. We can go to the next slide. This is just an image of their fairly recently made family tree. Don Green passed away about 1.5 years ago. This man here is in Chatham Square, that same cemetery I showed you before, from Sharith, Israel. He is visiting his great-great-great-great-grandfather, Gershom Mendes Seixas, who was a rabbi, unofficial rabbi in New York during the American Revolution and in Philadelphia as well. And Don Green is a 9th generation Jewish American. The next slide will show us a picture of one of his 2 sons. And that son, Aryeh, is posed under the portrait of Gershom Mendes Seixas. It's in the hallway of Mikveh Israel. I will be walking past this portrait in about half an hour from now or so, by chance, by happenstance. It's fascinating to see the resemblance between the two, really uncanny. But again, here, about 6 generations beyond each other, separate from each other. Aryeh is a 10th generation American Jew. I also will go to the next slide. I interviewed Aryeh's brother, Mark. This is Mark in 1985. And this image of Mark with his grandmother, who herself was, I guess, a seventh generation American Jew. This image was taken, as you can see, in 1985. Okay, and now we'll go to the next slide. I'll introduce you to some other people I met. Anita Moise Rosenberg lives in Charleston, South Carolina. What's interesting about her, so she is lineally descended from Jewish people who came to Charleston in the 1790s, and different from the last family members I showed you. Her family never left Charleston. Her family has been in Charleston since the 1790s. She's a very active member of KKBE, the Reformed Synagogue in Charleston that goes back to 1849. She's posing here with her ancestor, Penina Moise, who, among other things, was a beloved poet of the Confederacy. You have another picture here of Anita. And I wanted to show you this picture to give myself the opportunity to, I guess, speak a little bit to a personal angle that I take on these matters. So there's something, I hadn't anticipated this, but what I learned when I met these people and interviewed them is that they command, I think it's completely non-rational, but these people command a certain historical authority that I wasn't totally mentally prepared for the reality that in the presence of a person like Anita, I would suddenly feel like this person commands more authority than I would imagine a person can have. And it's simply on the basis of their genealogy. Now, that might just be my active imagination, but my larger point here is that genealogy is a way that we connect to the past, and it's a way that we popularize and mythologize the past. And the reason I want to mention this picture is that when I had the opportunity a few years ago to get a cemetery tour in Charleston, the two people that were offering to lead the tour are the two people that you see pictured here. And I'm sure the woman on the left-hand side leads a fantastic tour. But because I knew that Anita was genealogically descended from people who were buried in that cemetery, I chose to go on her tour. All of which is to say that this stuff has an enormous enchanting power over me, if not over other people. I know that we have very little time, but I wanted to introduce you to a few other people. Keith Stokes is an active political figure in Rhode Island politics today, lives in Newport, is a native of Newport. He tells a fascinating story of his Jewish American ancestors. He's related to Catherine and Slowey Hayes, who were Jews who lived in Newport up to that period. Their families lived in Newport up to the Revolution. At that point, they left Newport. They went to Boston. The two sisters went to Boston to live with their brother. And then finally, they moved to Richmond, Virginia. This is all in the 1820s. And when they moved to Richmond, we can go to the next slide. The two Newport sisters, Catherine and Slowey Hayes, they end up living with their brother, Samuel Myers. Their brother, Samuel Myers, has a son, Gustavus Adolphus Myers, and Gustavus Adolphus Myers has an affair with a freed African-American woman. And the child that they produce is the figure that you see in the middle. And then the grandchild is the figure you see on the right-hand side. These are all ancestors of Keith Stokes. And this explains how an African American in Newport, Rhode Island is related to Newport Jews from the 1820s. Their story goes deeper because when I talked to Keith, when he told me his family story, I asked him, do you have any other relatives that I should talk to? Are there any other people I should speak to in your family who can deepen my knowledge of the story? And he said, well, I have these two cousins, Drury and Armistead Welford. They are cousins, but they are brother and sister. They live in Richmond, and they too are related to Keith Stokes. They only found this out about 10 years ago when they read his blog. And so, and they are, I should also mention that these brother and sister, their family had long since converted to Episcopalianism. Keith is not Jewish either. So some people who were lineally descended from early American Jews aren't Jewish. Some of them are black, some of them are white, some of them are Southerners, some of them are Northerners. These are stories that we may not expect to hear. And on the theme of stories we may not expect to hear, I have one more video for you. So we'll go to that now. Some of you may have seen this image, but this is a precious 2-minute take that I want to share with you on the theme I just discussed.
Odd combination on my father's side of the Germany and the South.
Yeah.
Two places that we have fought against as a country.
Yeah, right.
Oh my goodness. I hope no slaves show up on this.
Please turn the page. Now, Larry, this is another part of the 18th.
Oh, you did it! You did it! I knew it! I knew it! Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Boy.
That's unbelievable.
Oh boy. Name of the slave owner, Henry Bernstein. My great-grandfather was a slave owner. Slaves, one female, age 4, mulatto, one female, age 17, mulatto. Oh, Professor, I'm so sorry. You can see why my father didn't want to tell me anything about it. This is just...
Oh, okay, we can move on from that clip. So I find that clip, I never get tired of watching it. I find it to be equal measures of funny, poignant, embarrassing, anything concerning Larry David is going to be cringeworthy. But there's something really poignant about it too, and it really sums up an important theme for me, which is that these are difficult stories to hear about our past as Jews in America, but there's essential stories to hear. Now, I want to just now get finally to explaining some of these images, including the cover image. Remember, I was telling you about Ararat, this 24-hour-long Jewish refuge in Grand Island. Well, about 15 years ago, a group of graphic artists, graphic designers at the University of Toronto decided to create an augmented reality project where they would essentially make it possible for people to go to Grand Island and, using a tablet or an iPhone, experience an augmented reality, which, if you're not familiar of it, essentially is you walk to a physical site, you hold your device in front of you, and you see things that are not really there. So these children are standing in front of what appears in the tablet to be Mordecai Emanuel Noah's tomb, because if Ararat had been a Jewish refuge, which is what these people were projecting, then maybe he would have been buried there. He's actually buried in Queens. And then we'll get finally to the cover image that I promised to tell you about. So this synagogue, too, is part of Ararat, but the synagogue isn't really there. It's a projected image of what a synagogue in around 1825 probably would have looked like. I think it's historically accurate. It's only there if you hold a phone up to where it appears in the augmented reality. And I use this image for the cover of the book to really magnify and symbolize the main idea here, which is that we always are looking at the past through the lens of the present. But an interesting sidelight here is that and this is something that the artists who created this project point out, that if you go to this site and you want to look at this synagogue, you better watch out, because it's actually a golf course. And if you're not careful, you might get beamed by a golf ball, which is another way of saying, don't forget that when you think you're looking at history, you're looking at the present that you live in. That is always the case. The final slide is, as I mentioned, my email, if anyone wants to contact me. And it looks like we have about 12 or 13 minutes for questions. So I will stop there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Michael, thank you so much. That was fascinating, and there's some really interesting questions already submitted. Before we turn to questions, I just wanted to let the audience know about 2 upcoming webinars from the Jewish Heritage Center. The first is How Jewish Women Built Community Through Music on March 19th, and Declarations of Americanism, Jewish American Displays of National Identity on April 16th. Both of these are presented by the Jewish Heritage Center's historian in residence, Madeline D.D. Pankin. You in the audience can learn more about these and other programs on our website, jewishheritagecenter.org. So now let's turn to your questions. And just as a reminder, you can submit questions for Dr. Hoberman by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So, going back to early in your presentation, there were some questions about the Samson Simpson's speech.
Mhm.
First of all, why was it shown backwards? And I think well, I can imagine the answer, but like to hear from you.
I captured that image from the American Jewish Historical Society's archive.
Okay.
And I think that I don't remember now. It's probably my own technical lack of expertise. I think I just did a screenshot. So that's a non-satisfying answer to a good question. But there it is.
Well,
It's
I
an
mean, I'm
honest answer.
wondering, and I don't know if the questioner was also wondering if it has something to do with reading, right to left. It's not written, I mean, it's not Hebrew characters, but was there something about
Yeah, no,
right to
right.
left?
So, and this is I'm going to just use this as an opportunity to discuss the speech in a little bit more detail, which is that I believe the speech was written in English first, and then again, the writer of the speech was Gershom Mendes Satius. I believe English was his first language. I believe he wrote the speech in English, then translated it into Hebrew, then gave the Hebrew to Simpson, and gave him some coaching about how to read it in Hebrew. Another question that a person might ask is, who in the audience understood this speech? And the
Right.
answer to that is probably nobody except for the one guy in the audience who was a professor of Hebrew. But these were ceremonial occasions, and there was a brief description given of the speech that was published.
Um, Sarah asks, in the research for your book, when encountering mythologies about Jews in early American history, how did you parse what was fact, what was folklore created by Jewish people, and what might have been anti-Semitic conspiracy or theories?
Okay, that's a good question. So I don't think I came across a lot of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories because most of the sources I was looking at were Jewish sources, right? So the sources I was viewing were instances of Jews representing their own history, right? And so for the most part, uh, for better or worse, they're going to represent their history in the best light possible. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
think anti-Semitism really comes into it. As far as parsing fact from fiction, that is always a challenge. That is always a challenge. And I think the best example I can give you from what I discussed was the Underground Railroad story, where, it took some, sort of deliberate thought on my part. But then when I realized that, all right, what's the period of the Underground Railroad? Well, this is the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s. What's the Jewish population of Newport at that time? Zero. This is a myth. But then for me, one of the issues, and this is what makes doing this kind of fun, is that I am less concerned with factualness versus made upness than I am with why we tell the stories in the first place. So even though that Underground Railroad story is not factual, it's interesting that people tell it, right? I
Mm-hmm.
understand why people tell it, and understanding why people tell it helps us to better understand the needs and desires that we have as American Jews in the present, right? Under present, a racially troubled situation that we've been in this country for hundreds of years, it helps us to better understand the things that we want to be true. If we think about what we want to be true, we can better understand, our situation that we're in and what we fear and what we hope for,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's not true.
Um, we have a couple of appreciative audience members who thank you for the shout out to the DAR, the Daughters of the American
Yeah.
Revolution, who are they have a specialty task force around or a specialty Jewish specialty research committee. Um,
Well, if any of those people, thank you for responding. If any of you have any questions for me, if I can help direct you particularly to people that I've met and interacted with, be in touch.
Terrific.
I'm happy to
Ellen
make those
asks,
connections.
where is the St. Charles publication available? That was the list of the blue blood Jews.
Okay, so that publication, the only place I could find it is in your archive, Rachel. Um, And so sometime around
Come
three or
on
four
down,
years ago,
folks.
that was the one copy of it that I was able to find. So there you go. It only came out one time. I think they had an intention of it being it was issued as a periodical. But as people know, 1935 was the height of the Depression, and I don't think there was a lot of money rolling around for people to indulge their genealogical, interests at that time. So it was a one-off. But yes, it's in your library. That's where I found it.
Terrific. Um, I think this is a reference. Well, there's a question about the blue bloods marrying out
Mhm.
to presumably, Protestant blue bloods. Um, but there's also a related question when speaking with Gentile descendants of early American Jews, what was your impression of how they felt about their Jewish origins?
Okay, that's a great question. So the people that I talked to, we're talking about Keith Stokes and Armistead and Drury Welford. All three of those people are, I would have to say, they're extremely enthusiastic about being connected to this history. Keith is on the board of directors of the Touro Synagogue and has been for many years. So he's very active in that capacity in Jewish affairs in Rhode Island and very engaged in the study of Jewish history and Black history in Rhode Island. The Welford, the brother and sister, they too were sort of fascinated by it. And they also told me the story. This is kind of an interesting little story that they both told me about. They learned this history from, I think it was a grandparent or an aunt that used to host big family dinners in Richmond. This is a real Richmond blue blood Confederate family that they grew up in. And this aunt knew about their Jewish heritage because members of the family had converted sometime shortly after the Civil War, I think. In any case, they said that this aunt was very excited to share the facts of their Jewish ancestry, but then she would say to them, she qualified it. She said, "But you must know you are Sephardic Jews." In other words, she bought into the Jewish fetishization of the Sephardim over the Ashkenazis. So even there, she was proud to have Jewish blood, but she wanted it to be known that it was Sephardic Jewish blood. So
Hmm.
there you have it.
We have a question which might, I bet you can answer this with your literary background and studies as well, Michael. The idea of a Jewish homeland on American soil took root in Michael Chabon's novel, The Yiddish Policemen's Unions. Fantastic book. Do you think he was aware of the failed Ararat? Ar-
I have to think he would have been. I don't think I've read his book a couple times. I don't think there's any reference to it, but it's certainly a prime example of that kind of alternate history, which projects, the possibility of a different Jewish history that we could have had. Um, but also I don't know. I mean, his book came out shortly after the Ben Ketcher book came out. Ben Ketcher book came out, I think, in 1998 or 1999, with so
what is
much.
that book? What?
The Jew of New York. The Jew of
Okay.
New York. That's the graphic novel, which really has nominally it has everything to do with Ararat because its title, The Jew of New York, refers to Noah himself. But in the story is really bizarre and full of all kinds of unexpected turns and obscurities. And really, you don't hear the Ararat story is sort of a sidelight to it. It's the starting point, but it's kind of a sidelight. But in any case, I'm imagining that Chabon would have known about Ben Ketcher at the very least, if he didn't know about the others.
Mhm. Um, we have one more comment for another clip showing another movie clip showing Jews in the Wild West. See Gene Wilder in Frisco Kid. And someone is asking for your email again. I think you'll have some interested follow-up questions. Can you?
Sure. So my email is mhoberman, that's HOMHOBERMAN, at Fitchburg State, all one word. If you're in Massachusetts, you know the city of Fitchburg, you know how to spell it, FITCHBURG, STATE.edu. And as far as the other Gene Wilder movie goes, In fact, I devoted more attention to that movie than I did to Blazing Saddles in my book. So if you're interested in hearing more about the Frisco Kid, you can find about 3 or 4 pages devoted to it in Imagining Early American Jews. There's a chapter of Imagining Early American Jews that essentially looks at how Jews have um, popularized their Western history and particularly interactions with Native people. And that's where I discuss
Mhm.
both of those movies and a bunch of other stuff as well.
Well, on that note, we encourage everyone to pick up this fascinating book. Michael, thank you so much. Congratulations on this publication. Folks should also know it received a really fantastic write-up in the Wall Street Journal. It's really an original and unique look at representations of Jewish American history. So, Michael Hoberman, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel.
And thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again. And
Very
thank you
good.
to everyone in the audience
Thanks so
who
much,
joined us
everybody.
this evening. And before we close, I'd just like to mention that this program has been made possible by donations from people all over the world. We hope you in the audience will consider making a gift to the Jewish Heritage Center. Your contribution supports free programming like this, as well as preservation and education about Jewish history and heritage. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We hope to see you again soon at our upcoming programs. And goodbye until then.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Rachel.